Henley Ryan. We realized that her nose is exactly my nose, so the genetics carry strong.
Welcome to Still a Part of Us, a podcast where moms and dads share the story of their child who was stillborn or who died in infancy. I'm Winter Red, and on this episode, Meghan is telling the story of her daughter Henley, who was stillborn at 36 weeks. As a word of caution to our listeners, this story contains emotional triggers of stillbirth and infant loss. Please keep yourself emotionally and mentally healthy and seek help if needed. Also, be aware that these birth stories may differ from his or her partners, as these accounts are told from their own perspective through the lens of trauma, heartache, and the passage of time. Please respect our moms and dads who are brave and gracious to share their children with us. Meghan, thank you so much for being on today. I'm excited to chat with you about your little Henley. And to give us a little bit of context, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Where are you guys at? Kind of just give us a little background of who you are.
My name's Meghan. I'm 32. I had to think about that for a second. My husband and I have been together since we were 19 years old, but we've been married for about 6.5 years now.
Okay.
Henley was our first pregnancy, first child. I am a nanny by trade. I've been a nanny for 7 years. We have 2 dogs.
Awesome.
A Chihuahua and a Border Collie Pit Bull mix.
Awesome. And what do you like to do in your free time?
We are Disneyland people.
You are?
That is our thing. We have annual passes to Disneyland. We go about once every 4 to 6 weeks. It's about a 4-hour drive for us.
No way.
Yeah.
That's
we
amazing.
love it. We were actually just there last Sunday and Monday.
Oh my goodness, it was crazy last Sunday and Monday, if I'm not mistaken.
It was a holiday weekend.
Yep.
And the opening weekend of a brand new ride. It was insane.
Did you end up on that brand new ride?
We did.
Oh
we managed to get on.
That's amazing. That's very cool. You guys are based in Nevada?
Yeah, we live in Las Vegas.
Okay, so that's why you're 4 hours away from Disneyland.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's awesome. And then can you give us a little bit of context about when Henley was born?
She was born on October 3rd, 2019.
So
just under 4 months ago.
Yeah. At the time of this recording, this is very new for you, Meghan. So thank you for coming on. And how did your pregnancy go? Like, did you guys get pregnant pretty quickly and everything?
It was a pretty much textbook pregnancy. We weren't necessarily actively trying when we got pregnant, but we also weren't preventing anything. So it kind of just happened on the time frame it happened. But the whole pregnancy was pretty textbook, pretty perfect. You know, I didn't have gestational diabetes. I didn't have any high blood pressure. By the time I had her, I'd only gained 25 pounds total, and I had her at 36 weeks. Everything looked great. Everything was perfect. I was healthy. To the fact that at 35 weeks pregnant, my doctor cleared me and let me go to Disneyland for the last time. So I did a Disney trip at 35 weeks.
At 35 weeks. Oh, man. So everything was really good. Did anything cross your mind about anything being wrong?
At our 34-week ultrasound, we found out that she was still breech, which was okay. I mean, we were eventually getting to the point where we were going to have the talk about having a C-section just because she wasn't turning.
Yeah.
But we also found out she was measuring in the 10th percentile. So she was measuring small. So the intent was at my 36-week checkup 2 weeks later, she was going to schedule for another growth ultrasound to just kind of see if that was a fluke, because they were kind of having a hard time getting measurements on her just via position. And I have a very short torso. So they're just between my bones, there wasn't a lot of space to get the measurement on her bones.
Gotcha.
So they were going to send me for another ultrasound just to check and see if it was a fluke or if she really was measuring small, but we didn't make it that far.
Yeah. Did that worry you at all? That she was maybe possibly measuring in the 10th percentile?
A little, but the ultrasound tech that did it had such a hard time getting a measurement on her thigh bone, and that's the one that they use the most for measurement. So I was just kind of like, it's probably just the fact that she couldn't get a true accurate measurement. Like, my belly's measuring normal. Everything else has been fine. I don't think there's an issue.
Okay. So kind of brushed it off. as a possible, like, it'll be fine
We'll
when we
find
check
out.
again.
And if she's still measuring small in 2 weeks, well, then we'll talk about maybe delivering early and, she'll be small. It'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then can you tell us a little bit more about what happened? So you went to the 34-week ultrasound, and then you were planning on coming in for a 36-week ultrasound. And I'm assuming you got checked at 35 weeks. She was fine.
I didn't.
Oh, you didn't?
I didn't have an appointment between 34 and 36 weeks.
Okay.
I came back in at 36 weeks for just my regular checkup with my OB. And my husband had come with me because he was going to get the Tdap shot. And at my doctor, if he came with me, they would do it for free. The insurance would cover the whole cost.
Yes, perfect.
So he had only come to very few appointments just due to work. It wasn't easy for him to take off to come. But this was one that he made it to because he needed to get that vaccine. And so it just made sense. So we went in for the appointment. They took my weight, and I had lost almost a whole pound over the course of 2 weeks, which seemed a little off to me. But I was like, I just spent like 3 days at Disneyland walking like crazy. So it's probably fine. It was probably just that I was more active than I had been. Blood pressure was fine. They give him the shot. And then my doctor, as he's about to rush out to leave to go to work, because he couldn't stay for the whole appointment, my doctor goes, hold on, wait. Let's do the heartbeat and let daddy listen to the heartbeat real quick. And we don't know why she decided to do this, but she did. So she gets out the Doppler, she puts it on my stomach, and I can tell that it's taking longer than it should to find a heartbeat. Obviously, he wasn't aware because he hadn't really been there for all the appointments to know how long it should take her to find it. And so she's searching, and she keeps moving it around, and 30 seconds go by and nothing. And then almost a full minute goes by and she can't find anything. And she goes, I'm having a hard time finding your heartbeat. I'm going to go grab the ultrasound machine. Comes back in with the ultrasound, puts it on my stomach, starts at her head. We see her skull, see her head, goes down. And as soon as she gets on the chest, I could see that her heart wasn't beating. I mean, by that point, you've seen enough ultrasounds, you know what you're looking for, you know what it's going to look like. And I think it took a minute for my husband to catch up and realize that nothing was moving. And from that point, my doctor said the words nobody wants to hear. I'm so sorry she has no heartbeat. And I kind of just went into the mode that I've gone into with every other tragic event in my life, because my life has been a little intense from 2016 to now. In 2016, I lost my grandmother in April and my dad in December. So there's been a lot of loss in the past couple of years.
Yeah, there really has been.
So I went into this mode of just the same thing I did when they passed away, just needing to get through the logistics. What do we do next? What do we do now? What's the next thing that has to happen? So there was no initial tears. There was just like, okay, now what? So she sent us to the hospital. She had already called labor and delivery at the hospital and told them to expect us. So when we got there, we go up to labor and delivery. They put us in a room and we think, okay, somebody's going to come in fairly quickly and do another ultrasound. They've got to want to be absolutely sure, because the ultrasound she used in the office was like, it's the terrible office quality ultrasound. Mm-hmm. So then it's an hour, almost an hour and a half later before an ultrasound tech finally comes in.
Are you kidding me?
At that point, we've both gone, well, they obviously think there's no hope of anything. So yeah, I guess we give up. The ultrasound tech comes in, does the ultrasound, and obviously they can't tell you anything.
Yeah, it's not in their purview. Mm-hmm.
But this ultrasound tech, and I think she did it as a kind of merciful gesture almost, she did not turn the screen away when she was typing out her findings to send in the report. Oh. So she left it where I could see it when she typed, breech presentation, no fetal heart tones, consistent with intrauterine fetal demise. Yeah. She left it where I could see that this is what it is. And everybody that I've talked to seems to think that was terrible. But personally, for me, I think she was doing it so that we wouldn't be sitting left waiting in limbo longer and longer and longer.
Yeah, you'd already been there for an hour.
Yeah. So at that point, they came back. The on-call OB came in, who this is obviously someone I've never met. And, he tells us what we already knew. I'm so sorry. She has no heartbeat. Here's your next options. So Henley was breech, and she had her head pretty far up under my left ribs, to the point that even still to this day, my rib cage is bowed out on the left side, like visibly people can tell that my ribs look different on one side than the other.
Really?
Yeah, I have a really, really short torso, so there just wasn't a whole lot of space.
Yeah.
And so my rib cage, most doctors I've asked, and they're like, honestly, we don't ever think it's going to go back. So that's like one of the permanent reminders of her. So he comes in and he tells me, okay, well, you could be induced, but here's all of these possible risks compounded, not just the normal risks of being induced with a stillborn baby, but to add to the fact that she's completely breech.
Yeah.
So they went through all the things that could have happened, that I could have tried to be induced and they could have delivered everything but her head and she could have gotten stuck. All these scary risks, and a lot of them were risks to my ability to have future children. Right. Then they read me the list of risks for going through with a C-section. Those were far less intense.
Yeah.
So without really any discussion with anybody, I just kind of sat there and went, yep, I will have a C-section. Like, no question about it. That's what we're going to do. But then the waiting kind of began for the day. So that was at about 10:30, 11 in the morning.
That
I finally decided, okay, I'm going to have a C-section. This is what I'm going to do. And I had talked to the on-call OB and he said, okay, but I'm going to call your OB first and just kind of have a discussion with her, tell her what's going on. A little while later, I get a phone call on the hospital phone in my room. My OB has called me and she's talking to me about the situation, telling me, my doctor was fantastic. She when she had to tell us that she had no heartbeat, she was crying even though we weren't. She's been wonderful throughout the whole thing. So she calls in between patients in clinic. She calls and says, I can't be there right now, but I can be there late tonight. I can come at like 11 o'clock tonight to do your C-section. I have something going on when I leave the office today because she has a family and children. So it's understandable. But she says, I can come in at 11 o'clock tonight and do it for you if you would rather wait for me. So that's what I ended up doing because I wanted to be with someone I was comfortable with.
Yeah.
It's the person I saw the whole pregnancy. And I felt like having her deliver was more comforting because she was the one there when we found out.
Yeah.
So we kind of just spent the whole day sitting in the hospital room, waiting around.
Oh, you did?
I did find out. So since I decided to wait until she came in late at night, I hadn't eaten anything at this point that day.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have breakfast before my doctor's appointment. My doctor's appointment was at 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm like, we're going to go in. This is going to be a 30-minute appointment. And then I'll just go get something to eat afterward.
Right.
So by that point, it was almost noon and I hadn't had anything to eat or drink. So when I decided that I was going to wait for my doctor, she told me, if you want to eat, you're allowed to eat until, 12 hours before when she's going to do the C-section.
Right.
So I had an hour and a half or so where I could get some food and I had a friend there with me and my husband, and they both thought it was strange that I wanted to eat. And I'm like, but I'm going to feel so terrible if I continue to go the whole rest of this time and don't eat anything.
Yes.
Like I have to try and eat. So we kind of just spent the whole day sitting in a hospital room, watching TV, talking, basically kind of ignoring. Personally for me, I was kind of ignoring the situation. It was like, I have all this weird limbo time that I have to sit in now.
Yeah.
And I just can't think about it. Now, meanwhile, my body knew what was going on. I had started having, mild contractions. Like my body had figured it out.
Oh.
I opted not to say anything to the nurses about the fact that I was contracting at all because I didn't want to accelerate the process in any way. I wanted to wait for my doctor, so I just didn't say anything.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't like bad enough that like there was any concern of like imminently going into actual labor.
Right. It was just very starting contractions.
My body was definitely starting to figure it out,
okay.
But it wasn't very intense or anything. So we kind of spent the whole day just talking and sitting in this room and waiting. And
so Meghan, really quickly, so Scott is there. He's not really been there for your doctor's appointments, not a ton of them, it sounds like. So he's probably shocked, I suspect.
Yeah, we actually had driven 2 separate cars to my doctor's appointment because, like I said, he was supposed to leave and go directly to work.
Yeah.
We ended up taking just one car from the doctor's office to the hospital because I was like, I can't drive. Like, that's not something I can handle right now. And, he just kind of was sitting there and he just kind of let me decide what was going to happen. He's like, he's obviously devastated, but I think he felt like whatever I decided to do from that point was my choice of how it was going to happen.
Yeah.
So I didn't even really discuss my choice to have a C-section with him. I just kind of looked at him and went, this is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And he went, okay.
Well, yes, it does put you in a little bit better position, I think, medically.
I feel like, from all the women that I've talked to, I've met several other parents who have lost their children, even one in town that I'm friends with now. And everybody says the same thing, that it's very unusual that I got the situation I did, where I got to choose that I wanted to have a C-section, and I got to choose whether I wanted my doctor to do it or not. Most people don't have this time where they can just kind of make these decisions.
Yeah, that is pretty unique. And so you were sitting in your room just hanging out. You say that you were kind of ignoring the situation in a sense.
Trying to talk about anything that wasn't what was happening.
So did you contact any family members or
We
anything?
did. After I made the decision that I was going to wait for my doctor and I was, going to have a C-section, we kind of called and told some people. I didn't really call anyone. I kind of left it up to Scott. He called my mom and stepdad, who actually were in California at the time. They had gone on, they were going for a weekend away, and they figured it would be the last weekend away before I went into labor. So they were like, we're going to go now. And, they were just going to stay at some hotel. Well, he called them, and immediately they drop everything, pack up, and start driving back. So they've got a 5-hour drive back, which is part of the reason probably that it was good that I decided to wait until later that night, because they got to be there. And then, we've let some other family members know, some friends. I have one friend that actually, we let her know right away what was going on. She found out just after we had gotten to the hospital, before we even had the ultrasound at the hospital. We had told her, and she dropped everything, had her husband come pick up her daughter, and showed up at the hospital and sat there with us all day. She and her husband went and got Scott's car from the doctor's office and drove it back to our house. And then she eventually went home, because we told her, look, we're going to be here a long time. We want you to go home, put your daughter to bed. And, you have things you have to do. And she ended up coming back, which I didn't know until later. She came back right before I went into surgery, and was there until like 3:00 in the morning. When I finally was like, you have to go home. Your baby's going to be up in like 3 hours.
Wow, what a friend. That's awesome. So you waited. Your surgery was planned at 11:00 at night.
So my doctor got to the hospital about 11:00 that night.
Okay.
And they started the prep for surgery and everything. The anesthesiologist came in, talked to me, kind of did the whole thing. I think we ended up in the actual OR closer to midnight.
Okay.
And then, it's the whole process of them actually numbing you and getting prepped and all of that. And Henley was born at 12:49 a.m. on October 3rd.
Okay.
So we found out the morning of October 2nd that she was gone. I had her very early on October 3rd.
October 3rd. How was the surgery? Was it okay?
It was fine. I had every reaction to the anesthesia that they say is normal. So the immediate things they warn you about is you could have a really, really itchy nose. Yep, felt like I wanted to rip my nose off my face. And then because your blood pressure is going to dip, you also probably will get nauseous. Literally, they put the medicine in, laid me down, and like 10 seconds later, I'm like, I feel like I'm going to throw up. So they had to pump anti-nausea medicine in.
Yeah.
And I mean, I obviously had never been through anything like that. So the sensation of just like not being able to feel anything from your rib cage down was very strange.
It is very strange. I agree.
But overall, I mean, it wasn't bad. Just the same terrible situation of any C-section where the baby's not alive. It's everybody's talking, the doctors are talking, there's all kinds of noise. And then you can tell they get to a point where they're pulling her out and the room goes silent. No one says anything. It's just deafeningly silent. The silence was followed up with, she's beautiful and I'm so sorry. But it was hard. Sorry. So neither one of us looked at her initially. They kind of took her, cleaned her up.
Okay.
They sewed me up and took me back to the room. and then got me all situated. And then they brought her in to us. They gave us the choice on what we wanted to do. I mean, before we even went into surgery, they had like a long list of things of, do you want this? Do you want that? You know, do you want us to take pictures? Do you have an outfit you want her put in? Is there anyone specific you want to be here? All the different things that we could have done. We ended up, Scott had gone home and gotten stuff for us earlier in the day, because obviously we didn't even have a hospital bag packed at this point.
Yeah.
I still thought I had 4 weeks to go, and it was my first baby. So I'm like, if I even go into labor by then, like everything else was ready, but we hadn't packed a bag. So he went home and got all the stuff, and I had him bring an outfit for Henley, and we had a stuffed animal that he brought that he specifically wanted with her. It's a little Groot from Guardians of the Galaxy.
That's amazing.
It was the first thing that he had bought specifically for her. So they bring us back to the room, and they had already taken her and cleaned her up and taken pictures of her for us.
Oh, they did. Okay.
And changed her clothes, which we were given all the options if we wanted to do these things ourselves. But I was mostly afraid of what she was going to look like, that I didn't know that I wanted to. So I knew I wanted to see her. I knew I wanted to hold her, but I didn't know if I wanted to dress her, because I just wasn't sure, exactly what was going to be. And I mean, we had a pretty good idea of how long she'd been gone at that point.
What did they say?
Because the night before I went to the doctor, I was laying on the couch at about 9 p.m. and my placenta was in the front. So we couldn't usually like see her kicks like from across the room or anything. But there were these intense, crazy kicks that Scott could see from across the couch. And it was crazy. And that's the last time I for sure know she moved. Well, come to find out, the thing that doctors don't tell everyone is that erratic and extra intense movements can be a sign of distress. And had I known this and gone to the hospital immediately, we may have had a different outcome in the end.
Yeah.
So this is something that I pass on to every woman I know that's pregnant now.
Yeah.
I'm like, your doctor's not going to tell you this, and I don't mean to sound scary, but you need to know this.
Yeah. Yeah. So you think it was the night before, basically on the 1st?
Sometime between 10:30 p.m. on October 1st and when we went to the doctor at 8 a.m. on October 2nd.
Okay.
So she had only been gone at most like a day and a half by the time I had her.
Yeah.
And because, I know after the fact now that because I had a C-section, she came out looking a lot more perfect than had I delivered her naturally.
Yeah.
I mean, there's less trauma that they go through that way.
Exactly.
So they brought her in and had her all dressed up, and I held her. And, the first thing we noticed is that, like I said, we had noticed in an ultrasound because we had a 3D 4D ultrasound at like 30 weeks, but immediately everybody, my husband and me both are like, my nose, my nose is very turned up, and it's from my dad's side. And apparently it's a very, very strong genetic trait because my dad had it, I have it, my half brother has it, and it passed right on to Henley. And we took a little bit of time. I held her. Scott I asked him if he wanted to hold her, and he just couldn't. He just didn't feel like he could. I did be slightly pushy, and I made him come in next to me and have a picture taken so that we at least had 1 or 2 pictures of the 3 of us.
Yeah.
Even though now I regret that I didn't call Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep to come take really great quality photos. It just wasn't something that my mind was able to process that I should have done at that point in time. They had given me the paper with their phone number, but in that whole thing happening, you don't really think about that.
Yeah.
I honestly never would have even thought to bring her clothes, except for my friend that was there with us. It's actually her neighbor that has also lost a child. And she had actually, when she found out, she had immediately called her neighbor and gone, what do I need to tell her to do?
That's awesome. That was
so
smart.
Her neighbor lost a baby at 34 weeks, and it was about a year and a half ago. Oh. So she still fresh, but was able to tell her, okay, you're going to want to tell her to take all the pictures, to bring an outfit for her, to, all these things that you don't think about in the moment. And she didn't think about in the moment, but she's basing them off things she regrets.
Right.
or things that somebody else told her.
Yeah.
That I'm so grateful that somebody told me. It's so helpful to have somebody that can actually be like, no, I've been there and this is what you need to know.
Let's try. Yeah. You'll want this. Yeah.
So we only had Henley in our room for probably 20 or 30 minutes. We actually gave the opportunity for my mom and stepdad, who were the only other, I had the one friend at the hospital and then my mom and stepdad were there. We gave the opportunity for them to meet her, but I didn't want them to meet her in the room with me. I just didn't know how I would do seeing that. So they had another room right next to me that they could have brought Henley into, and my mom and stepdad could have met her in there. My mom and stepdad actually chose not to.
Okay.
I haven't really asked the reasoning behind that. It was their choice. I left it up to them.
Yeah.
So the nurses eventually, we decided, okay, we're ready to let her go, gave her a final kiss, and they took her. After that point, they actually took her in the other room, and we know now that they took hand and footprints. They did them, in ink. They did them into clay that was then given back to us later. And we have these really special things that I guess we're one of the first from the hospital that they're actually started doing it. There are 3-dimensional molds of her hand and her foot.
That's awesome.
So, you can see every detail, and her little hand is curved. So like you could put your finger in it. And they took a bunch of pictures, and so we have all that stuff now. And then I was actually given the option to leave the hospital that night, the night of the 3rd.
Really?
So very quickly, I chose to stay overnight just because I didn't want to go home at night. I was like, I'd rather go home. We have a roommate, and I decided I'd rather go home while he's at work.
Yeah.
I'd rather transition back into being at home while he's not there.
Right.
So waited and stayed one more night. And then the process of getting discharged was a little iffy because they have to get your vitals in a certain area to be able to discharge you. Well, obviously my blood pressure was high because traumatic experience. And then they kept having problems getting my oxygen level to be good. Well, they'd keep coming in there trying to take my oxygen level after somebody had said something that set me crying. I'm like, well, clearly I'm not breathing properly because I'm crying.
Yeah.
So eventually we got everything okay. And I went home that Friday at about 11 a.m. So I was only in the hospital from Wednesday at like 9:30 in the morning till Friday at 11 a.m.
Oh, but it's a C-section. Holy cow. I can't believe they're like, you can go home.
Yeah. I was impressed that they would let me go home that soon.
Yeah. Usually it's a little bit longer than that. I
was up walking probably, I don't know, 4 hours after the C-section. They had me up and walking. And so they were, I had ticked off all the boxes of the things they need you to be able to do before you can go home.
So were you feeling okay?
I was sore, but overall, yeah, I was okay. We found out through this process that I can't have Toradol because that makes my nose itch terribly. So 2 doses of that.
Noted.
And I went, no more. So, I left the hospital on just ibuprofen, 800 milligram ibuprofen, but ibuprofen nonetheless. And the recovery wasn't horrible. I think part of that is, it's much easier to recover from a C-section when you're not taking care of somebody else.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's so true. Now, Meghan, can you tell me a little bit about Henley's name? How did you choose her name?
So her first name was picked out before she ever even was a thought. Scott and I had watched a movie called Now You See Me, and the main character that's female, her name is Henley. And we both had just looked at each other and were like, that's what we're naming a baby.
Really? Okay.
We hadn't even talked about having children at this point, but that's what it was. And so we chose her name then. And as soon as we found out we were pregnant, I was like, I know it's a girl. I know it's a girl. And then everybody's like, oh, okay. And we had an ultrasound at just before 15 weeks. We paid for one because I was too eager to know. I could not wait. And we found out she was a girl. And so immediately she had a first name. She did not have a middle name until she was born. I had wanted her middle name to be Ryan, but I spent a lot of time bothered by the fact that like her first name is kind of gender neutral. And so if I give her a boy's name as a middle name, is she going to be that kid in school where they're reading the attendance list and nobody's going to know if that's a boy or a girl? Yeah. So then I thought about spelling Ryan differently. I thought about spelling it with Ryann, so that it screamed female, but I didn't really love that. So after everything happened, we knew that all of my fears weren't going to be a factor about her name.
Yeah.
Said, forget it. I'm naming her what I want.
There you go.
And just went with it. So her middle name is just spelled just like any other Ryan, like Ryan.
Okay, that's awesome. I was wondering, I was like, that's just kind of a unique name. So yeah, it's always tricky, right? Names. So
you kind of immediately go to, okay, what are they going to get teased about with this name?
Yep. That's exactly right.
Or you don't want to be me, who my name is Meghan, but it's not spelled exactly the way everyone else spells it. And you have to spell your name for everyone forever.
Yes, forever. It is what it is, right? I have a name of Winter. Everybody's like, what? Yes, like the season. So you guys headed home, and did you end up having an autopsy? Was there any sort of conclusion about what happened?
They gave us the option for an autopsy, which initially we wanted to, but then we found out that insurance doesn't cover it. It would have cost us $3,000. So we decided, I talked to my doctor, and she said, realistically, with everything I've seen, after looking at her, after looking at the placenta, I don't think there's a high likelihood that an autopsy is going to give you any answer. And at that point, we were just like, well, then we're not going to spend the money on it.
So even just the first, just basically looking at her once over, looking at the placenta, they didn't have any conclusions either there.
The only thing she came up with initially is that she had a very, very short umbilical cord. So when they did the C-section, they pulled Henley out. She barely had enough cord to put her onto my stomach before she delivered the placenta.
Oh.
So her cord was really, really short, and it wasn't coiled as much as it should have been because it was so short.
Gotcha.
So realistically, the best guess on what we think happened is that as she was trying to turn from breech, she was compressing her umbilical cord because it was so short. And that's why she was measuring small. And I guess I should mention that in the end, when she was born at 36 weeks, she was 18 and a half inches long, which is pretty normal for that gestation.
Yeah.
But she was only 4 pounds, 10 ounces. So she was almost 2 pounds too small.
Yeah. For being
36
weeks. Yeah.
So they think that as she was trying to turn, she was compressing the cord, and that's why she had started measuring small, because she had compressed it somewhat, but was still getting some blood flow. And they think that just that night, after I felt her move last, they think she just compressed it completely.
So much. Yeah. Oh. Okay. So that's what they think happened.
After the fact now, I've actually gone to see a genetic counselor and a high-risk specialist just to prepare for the next time, to know, what can we do? If there's anything different, is there anything I should be doing, shouldn't be doing? They've labeled it as intrauterine growth restriction because she was so small. And they've labeled it as partially a placental insufficiency. They think that my placenta was just starting to kind of crap out too early.
Oh.
But they didn't really test anything, so they're not positive. We're also running, they ran some blood tests on me in the hospital for clotting disorders, and I came back negative for all of those. But currently, I actually went for blood work yesterday. They're running just like the huge panel of all the things just to see. And we're also running genetic carrier screening just to make sure. The genetic counselor, the high-risk doctor, and my doctor don't think we're going to find anything. They do not think there was a genetic component to anything. Basically, my doctor just said, as horrible as this is, it's just a random, terrible occurrence. Nothing to be done to prevent it, nothing to be done to change it. It's just like, crappy luck, essentially. Yeah. So they're running all these things, but they don't think they're going to find anything. It's more just for peace of mind to know that, like, we've checked off all the boxes, and everything comes back normal.
Yeah. Did you have any genetic testing done beforehand?
I did not.
Okay. So this will be kind of the
during pregnancy.
Okay.
At the beginning, they offer you the early genetic testing, and I kind of had the mindset, to me, it's not going to matter what they find, so I'm just not going to do it. It's not going to change what's going on for me.
Yeah.
Now, the next time I get pregnant, all the tests all the time.
All of it. We're doing it all. Well, and
anything you want to do it.
Yeah, I was going to say, now that you've had the stillbirth, and it puts you in a different category now, and so you're going to check all the things.
The wonders of I am immediately a high-risk patient the next time I'm pregnant.
Yeah, exactly.
first pregnancy, and now every subsequent will be considered high risk.
When you get home, then how is being home? Did you guys start planning any funeral services or memorial services?
We decided not to have any kind of a funeral, just not something that either of us really wanted.
Yeah.
We had her cremated, which that process was more dramatic than it needed to be with the funeral home.
Oh.
It took an excessively long amount of time, and there were issues where, I called trying to get information. Nobody gave me information. It was just a whole mess. It took like 3.5 weeks before we got her back.
Are you serious? Oh, God.
And actually, I found out from the certificate of cremation that she had been cremated 5 days prior to the day they finally told me that we could go pick her up. It was a mess.
Oh. Did you do it? So no funeral services. You had her cremated. You did get her back though.
We did.
And is she just at home and with you guys?
We actually when we got her back, they just kind of had given the urn that they give for free, because the funeral home we went through is one locally that does things. Any baby under the age of 2, they'll cremate for just the state fee. So the $10 or whatever you have to pay for the state.
Yeah.
They don't charge for it, which is why we went through them, because after this whole experience, it's a lot of money that you didn't expect to be spending.
Yes. It's like a rude wake up. It's like, what? I have to,
we went from expecting $1,000 copay for a delivery to $4,000 in copays for a C-section, and it happening 4 weeks earlier than we anticipated. So it was kind of crazy. So she came home in the urn they gave us, which we didn't really love. So we eventually purchased another one. And it's shaped like a castle. My husband picked it because it makes him think of Disneyland.
Yeah, I love that.
So her urn and, all of her hand and footprints and molds and everything, they're just kind of on the dresser in her nursery. Because I was 36 weeks pregnant. We had an entire room ready.
Yeah.
Clothes washed and put in the dresser, diapers out, everything totally ready. So that just seemed like the right place for her to be.
Yeah.
Eventually, I'm sure we will do something else, because we're very hopeful that there will be another baby to actually use that nursery. But for now, that's just what feels right.
Do you go hang out in her nursery?
I do. I actually sit in her rocking chair in there, and I have a little journal that I write letters to her in. It's just, about nothingness, just about what's happening that day or whatever, but makes me feel close to her.
Yeah.
Because, it's the chair that I bought with the intention of, well, it was purchased for me, but with the intention of getting to rock her, and we don't get to, so that's what is comforting. We also have a weighted teddy bear that's weighted to her birth weight, and sometimes I'll just sit in there with that. But otherwise, we keep the door shut. It's the one room in the house we keep the dogs out of.
Yeah. It's kind of a special area.
Preserved.
Yeah. This is her room.
It's actually connected to the room I'm sitting in currently by a bathroom. So it's just
really?
the other side of this bathroom next to me.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. I can't imagine.
For letting me talk about her.
Well, we always want to talk about our kids, right? I mean,
absolutely.
I always want to talk about my son. So, is there anything else you want to say to remember about her?
I mean, just that just like everybody else, we wish things could have been different, but we're so thankful for the time that we did have. I got 36 weeks of having her with me, which is something that I would never trade.
Yeah.
Even though the end was horrible, I would never trade getting that time with her.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Meghan. So many thanks to Meghan for being vulnerable and sharing your beautiful story of Henley with us. Head over to our website, stillapartofus.com, where you can find the show notes, including a full transcript of this interview and any resources that were mentioned, where you can sign up for our short and helpful email newsletter, where you can learn how you can become a patron and support the work it takes to produce this show for just a few dollars a month, and lastly, where you can find out how to get in touch with us if you want to share your child's story on the show. The show was produced and edited by Winter and Lee Red. Thanks to Josh Woodward for letting us use his song, Flickering Flame. You can find him at joshwoodward.com. Lastly, subscribe to this podcast and share it with a friend that might need it, and tell them to subscribe. Why? Because people need to know that even though our babies are no longer with us, they're still a part of us.
My opinions may have changed, but not the fact that I am right. Ashley Brilliant.